So recently I've been doing kind of big silly intros for these sort of things, kind of taking a topic way out of left field and then bringing it back to the video subject in question. Really just been doing it for my own amusement, to stay sane, really. This week, not going to do that because they've released Samoa Joe. What the hell? Yes, welcome back to my Greatest Of series, where I've been taking a look at some of the greatest wrestlers of all time, some of the greatest events of all time. We're back to an individual wrestler this week because, yes, WWE have released, well, a lot of people who probably deserve to keep their jobs in WWE, but specifically Samoa Joe, who I believe, honestly, is one of the greatest of all time. And as always, I'll be breaking this down into 5 distinct categories, 5 reasons why Samoa Joe is one of the greatest of all time. But I think this video will perhaps educate some people who might not know much about Samoa Joe before WWE. They might have seen bits and pieces of him in Impact Wrestling, or TNA as it was then known. But beyond that, his body of work on the independent scene was insane. And there'll be people watching this who know far more about that than me as well. So do feel free to leave any match recommendations, anything like that in the comments section down below. But hopefully by the end of this, we can all come together and agree that Samoa Joe is one of the greatest of all time and should not have been released from WWE. I still can't get over it. So reason number 1, and it's the most obvious reason when we're looking at Samoa Joe as a wrestler. If you've ever watched most of his matches, he demonstrates this. It's his very unique style. These days, there are quite a few wrestlers that have amazing agility despite also being really big guys. I'm talking about people like Brian Cage, Keith Lee, Bronson Reed, quite a few out there in the current landscape. But this was a lot less common back in Samoa Joe's indie heyday in the early to mid 2000s, where it was a bit more distinct. WWE was the land of the giants. The indie scene, by contrast, was full of small flippy guys or small technical guys who were a lot more shorter on the whole. That really made Samoa Joe stand out like nobody else around that sort of time. He was a combination of both things. Even though he's not, gigantically tall or anything, he is still a big man wrestler, but he moves with the grace and the fluidity of a much smaller man. And also, I think, even compared to the modern guys these days who combine those two things, I still think that Joe was even more graceful and snappy and sharp and smooth with his movements than pretty much anybody I can think of. So I think the most appropriate place to start is with possibly Samoa Joe's most famous match ever, but there's a few other candidates that we might discuss a little bit later on in this video. But for now, we're talking about TNA Unbreakable 2005 and the triple threat match between Joe, AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels. And this match has gone down in wrestling history as an unbelievable match, possibly the greatest Impact or TNA match ever, 5-star match as well, and really it shows how well Joe combines grace and punishment. I mean, you've got these two guys who are now regarded as two of the greatest high flyers ever, flying around the ring, bouncing off each other and occasionally bouncing off the brick wall that is Samoa Joe. Occasionally he's playing the role of the big man in this match, but with increasing regularity, he also plays their game. He's exchanging fast-paced strikes with them. He's throwing himself around just as much as these guys are, and it really is breathtaking to behold. There's one moment in particular that I think really sums this up, and the camera work is great here. It's when AJ and Daniels are brawling on the outside, and in the background we see Joe get to his feet, hit the ropes, and just launch himself at them with his full body weight. And we'd see down the line on a much grander stage in WWE that Joe's dives are unlike anybody else's because he throws himself into them and he's got all that force behind him and it really packs a punch. But this match, of course, is a triple threat match, which means that the focus of the match is not always on Samoa Joe. So to really demonstrate this further, we're going to be taking a look at 2 of his singles matches, one against each of the other guys in this triple threat. The first is a singles match he had against Christopher Daniels on April 13th, 2006, a match regarded as one of the best matches on just a regular Impact in company history. And towards the end of this match, we really see how effective this combination of size and grace that Joe has is in context, because at one point Daniels hits like a huge Frankensteiner and Joe's body, I mean, he's so athletic that he just takes it perfectly, launching himself across the ring in a front flip. And when any other wrestler does that, you know, it's a cool moment, it's always a cool spot. But when Joe does it, he slams on the canvas, he's got all that size and strength behind him, and it really makes Daniels seem all the more better for being able to pull it off, even though in reality a lot of the work is being done by Joe. The same can be said of power moves. Daniels scoops him up at one point and hits a blue thunder bomb. Again, if Daniels was hitting that on somebody more his own size, it would be a cool moment, but nothing like the drama of him hitting it on somebody like Samoa Joe. But Joe fights back and gets the win with a move off the second rope where he just absolutely destroys Daniels, again demonstrating his amazing combination of grace and size and strength and power, those two worlds very much colliding. But the great thing about Samoa Joe, I think, is how he adapts to these situations as well. So if we now go to his singles match against AJ Styles at Turning Point 2005, we can see that in action. And I think the reason that this match is so impressive and so impactful is because Joe knows when to dial that back. If he wanted at this stage in his career, he could go out and have indie-rific, flippy matches with anybody he wanted and it would be awesome. But he knows the impact, no pun intended, of scaling that back a little bit and just being the powerhouse when the situation calls for it. That's exactly what happens in this match with Styles. Joe is generally being a monster in this match. It's a much more traditional dynamic. You've got the smaller, quicker guy, you've got Joe being the heelish monster, you've got him just swinging AJ into the barricade at one point, you've got him grinding AJ down with submissions and all that sort of thing. AJ fights back, of course, but Joe has the majority of this match under his control and puts AJ away with the Coquina clutch right at the end. It's a wonderful example of Joe being this monster heel and proving that he doesn't always need to bring out all of these athletic parts of his game to be just as effective. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that Joe's most famous match is probably that triple threat at Unbreakable 2005, and a whole section of indie fans watching this video probably went, "No, Jack, you're wrong." Don't worry, we're going to get onto that right now. Because before he was ever lighting it up in TNA, Joe was the man in Ring of Honor. He's the company's third ever champion. He's also still, I believe, the holder of the longest single reign in company history with 645 days. And generally, he transformed the company under his reign. It started off as a very impressive collection of talent, but when Joe was champion over that kind of year and a half, year and three-quarter period, it became something much more. And also during this time, Samoa Joe had his most critically acclaimed, and for many people, his most beloved feud ever of his entire career. And it's getting its own section in this video because it deserves it. That's right, reason number 2 is the CM Punk feud. The pair had an incredible trilogy of matches which told a story that was both very dramatic in a way that we are familiar with, but also dramatic in an unconventional sense. It maybe didn't go quite the way we expected. The first two matches, and this is so indie-tastic, I love it. The first two matches went to 60-minute time limit draws. The final match did not, but I'll get onto that in just a second. The first match is basically the story of CM Punk trying to drag Samoa Joe into deep waters. We see that story in combat sports all the time. In the world of boxing, we saw Floyd Mayweather do exactly that to Conor McGregor. He knew that Conor McGregor did not have a boxer's cardio, and that if he just lasted the course and dragged him into deep waters, he could finish him off pretty easily. I'm not saying it was a shock that Floyd Mayweather won that boxing match, but that's just a very obvious example of this story. So what CM Punk's doing in this match is the same thing. He's thinking, right, I'm going against a guy who's an insane athlete, he's bigger than me, stronger than me, possibly even quicker than me. What I'm going to do instead is use my insane cardio, drag out the match, and hopefully beat him when he's tired. What CM Punk didn't know, and this is all in character, in kayfabe, what CM Punk didn't know is that Samoa Joe also has insane cardio. That match is incredible. I'd obviously highly recommend any of the matches I've talked about on this video, really, but this match is awesome, and I believe it's on YouTube for free, courtesy of Ring of Honor, so there's no excuse not to watch it. Then we move on to the second match. The event itself was called Joe vs. Punk 2, that's how hyped it was, and it took place in Chicago, Illinois. For many reasons, this match is often regarded as not only one of the best in Samoa Joe's career, not only one of the best in CM Punk's career, but maybe the best match in Ring of Honor history. And there's a few candidates for all of those categories, but it's present in every one of them. Punk vs. Joe 2 is even more intense than the first match. It's got a lot of questions going in. What are the crowd going to be like in Chicago right behind their indie hero, CM Punk? What's it going to be like in terms of the length of the match? Are they going to go a full 60 minutes once again? Surely not, Ring of Honor, surely not. They did. Yes, the match goes 60 minutes again, and it's got everything you could possibly hope for. Both men have adapted their strategy slightly from the first match, and that plays out in very enthralling fashion. And once again, it ends with a 60-minute time limit draw. Joe cannot beat Punk, this upstart challenger, to try and take his Ring of Honor championship, but likewise, Punk cannot unseat Joe. And this is made very clear in the finish of both matches, because at the end of the first match, as the 60 minutes expired, it was Punk on top, whereas in the second match, it was Joe on top as time ran out. So these two are very finely poised. And then we get the third match of the trilogy, which is comfortably regarded as the worst of the three. That doesn't mean that it's bad, it's just not the same epic level as the first two. It's also the first match of the three with no time limit. Ring of Honor went, right, we're not going to have a time limit in this match. It goes until the finish. So obviously, it lasted half the time. And the story of this match is kind of down to Joe punishing Punk early on, busting him open very, very early, and securing the win with the Coquina clutch as Punk is exhausted due to blood loss and all that sort of stuff. It's a compelling story, but it doesn't necessarily make for the most exciting match of the trilogy. But I think that's fine. I mentioned earlier on, this feud is dramatic in both conventional and unconventional ways. And this is one of the unconventional parts, the ending. It's not Hollywood. It's not what you'd expect. If this was a movie, CM Punk would finally overcome Samoa Joe and beat him in this third and final match. Instead, Joe beats Punk with the most ease of any of the matches so far. And I think that's a nice storyline touch, especially because Punk would go on to have his own legendary Ring of Honor Championship reign, and because he couldn't beat Joe back in the day, it made it mean all the more. Joe's reign would come to an end very shortly after that third match, where he would lose to Austin Aries at Final Battle 2004, bringing an end to one of the most legendary reigns in all of indie wrestling history, in my opinion. However, the story wouldn't be over for Samoa Joe on the indie scene, not by a long shot. In fact, I believe that after this title loss to Austin Aries, Samoa Joe became, and this is the most the most pretentious caption I think I've ever done in one of these videos so far, but I think Joe became the heart of American indie wrestling. Ooh, feel the cringe. Now, you'd think that perhaps because he lost the Ring of Honor World Championship, you'd think that Samoa Joe's schedule may have eased slightly at this point. No, it got even more insane. That's because in 2005, Joe signed with TNA and was working Ring of Honor still, and was working more indie dates here, there, and everywhere between. He was a very busy boy, and I think the crown jewel of the scene at the time. And during this time also, Joe had some more legendary matches to add to his resume. Ring of Honor invited the legendary Kenta Kobashi over from Japan and put him against, who else? Samoa Joe. Legend has it that Kobashi was actually very nervous about this match and didn't know how the American crowd would receive him, and Joe apparently said, no, they're going to know who you are and they're going to love it. And Joe was right. People loved this match. I believe it won the Observer's Match of the Year award for 2005. It was incredible. They went back and forth, all the strikes you could possibly imagine, and it was almost a bit of a love letter in a way to that King's Road style of All Japan Wrestling in the 90s, which really Kenta Kobashi helped create. I don't know if it's accurate to say he helped create it, but he certainly helped pioneer and perfect it at least. So that's one of the reasons that I think Samoa Joe was the heartbeat of the American indie scene at the time. He was representing the States and United States wrestling against an all-time great from Japan in a very punishing but also a very feel-good match as well. It's a proper celebration of wrestling from two different sides of the world. But it's not the only reason, because not only was Joe the heartbeat of the American indie scene, he was also the heartbeat of Ring of Honor, and he represented the company in their very surprisingly well-booked, I should say, promotional war against CZW. Usually when promotions have like an interpromotional war, there's a lot of politics. I'm sure there was in this case as well, but they managed to suppress that and tell a phenomenal story in front of some split, very hot crowds. And in this promotional war against CZW, Samoa Joe was not only representing Ring of Honor, but he was also fighting a huge foe from Ring of Honor from within. That's because in this massive cage war match between the two factions, Ring of Honor and CZW, Samoa Joe got taken out by Ring of Honor's own Bryan Danielson and had to be replaced in the match and everything. It was all very, very dramatic, and it led to a huge feud between the two. That match went down at Fight of the Century 2006, and guess what? It was a 60-minute time limit draw. The poignancy here in the storytelling is unbelievable. You've got Samoa Joe, who held on to the Ring of Honor Championship in 2004 thanks to 60-minute time limits. He survived against CM Punk, especially in that first match. And he can't win it back because Bryan Danielson, has taken him to a 60-minute time limit draw. Oh, The irony, it's delicious. And Joe was fighting a war on all fronts at this point. He was fighting forces from within Ring of Honor. He was fighting CZW. He was going toe-to-toe with a legend in the form of Kenta Kobashi, who represented All Japan really, but had since, moved to Noah and everything. And he also took on one of Noah's newer guard, Takeshi Morishima. Again, if you know anything about Morishima, what a matchup that is. Check out my video on Daniel Bryan being one of the greatest ever if you want to know more about that. And that match between the pair of them came right towards the end of Samoa Joe's time with Ring of Honor. He was about to leave for TNA full time. And it remains one of the strangest booking decisions in Ring of Honor history. A lot of people question this because Joe won and he was on his way out, not immediately afterwards, but pretty shortly afterwards. A lot of people were saying maybe he should have put Morishima over. On the very next night of the tour, Morishima became Ring of Honor World Champion. Should he not have beaten Samoa Joe to make it? You know what I mean? It just goes to show how respected though and how beloved Samoa Joe was for the scene at the time and how special he was, because only a select few wrestlers can go out not on their shield. Only a few wrestlers can win towards the end, and it doesn't seem weird and it's not questioned. Samoa Joe is absolutely one of these. He beat Morishima, and then Morishima won the belt, and it always left this lingering sense that maybe Joe could have won it once again had he really been given another chance. I mentioned that Joe's match with Kenta Kobashi was a bit of a love letter to the Kings Road style, the All Japan style from the 90s, and I think this leads us on to our fourth category, because I think Joe is a real historian in the ring. And the big thing about him that really enforces that is number 4, his old school presence. And I think this is really most apparent during Joe's NXT run, which brings us on to this stage of his career, because as much as NXT is inspired by modern day indie wrestling, NXT, and specifically Triple H, are heavily inspired by old school, territorial NWA style wrestling. That's why the history of the titles in NXT are littered with rematches between the same opponents, but the story and the tactics in those matches all evolve a little bit each time. It's a very old school way of thinking. So in the case of Samoa Joe and the NXT Championship, that really came off the back of a very simple story. Finn Balor was the NXT Champion, he and his best buddy Samoa Joe won the Dusty Classic, then Joe turned heel and beat down his best friend because he was jealous of him and he wanted his belt. It's simple, it's old school, it's very effective. They had a very even match at TakeOver London with Finn Balor retaining by the skin of his teeth, and then they had the rematch in Dallas, which was awesome in terms of psychology. It felt like Joe was this inevitable force. Yeah, Balor won the first match. Surely a title switch is imminent now, we all thought. And in the match, by a stroke of good fortune, I suppose, Joe gets busted open very early on, maybe within the first lockup even, and it makes him look even more terrifying, even more like this monster who's coming after Balor and is going to take that title. But against all odds, Balor survives somehow and beats Samoa Joe, rolling him up while trapped in the coquina clutch, the old Bret Hart reversal off the turnbuckle, kicking backwards. And it made it all the more effective and shocking. And then just when you think that things couldn't get more unexpected, Samoa Joe wins the belt from Balor at a random house show in Lowell, Massachusetts. Now that sounds ludicrous and it sounds like the sort of decision that everybody would hate, but honestly at the time, everybody loved it. There was grainy footage going around and that sort of thing. Everybody was hyped that this felt real. The title could change hands at any moment on any NXT show. Again, it's old school and it's perfect for Samoa Joe because he's got that about him. He seems like a bit of a throwback with a new age athleticism about him. Then on to the feud with Shinsuke Nakamura, and at this time, Joe felt almost like a bit of a transitional champion. Was he just in there to transition the belt from one popular babyface in Finn Balor to another in Shinsuke Nakamura? And Joe fans were like, no, he deserves more than that. And sure enough, at TakeOver Brooklyn 2, Joe lost to Shinsuke Nakamura in a match where Nakamura's strategy seemed very much to be, let's try and separate this guy's jaw from his very face. And I believe that Joe actually did legitimately suffer a dislocated jaw in this match. But then, just as we thought we knew what was going to happen next, another unexpected twist in the tale. Another old school gut punch of a booking decision involving Samoa Joe in NXT. He came back at Nakamura and beat him at NXT TakeOver Toronto. And we had that slow sense of progressive storytelling which Joe had mastered years ago in that feud with Punk in 2004. We had Joe taking the Kinshasa but rolling out of the ring to avoid the pinfall, a mistake he'd previously made in their last match. We had Joe just being a bit of a dick, just punching Nakamura down low and using that to get the win and get the title back. And it was sickening for fans of Nakamura, and I wanted Nakamura to win at the time, but it was damn effective. And again, I've mentioned, I think Joe was the perfect person to carry out these old NXT booking tricks, and that's because of our fifth reason that he's one of the greatest ever. His air of legitimacy. Samoa Joe is terrifying. Terrifying, and combines that with an amazing charisma on the microphone. The most famous example I can think of is that promo with Paul Heyman when Brock Lesnar hasn't answered Joe's challenge and Joe's in the ring alone with Heyman and Heyman thinks he's untouchable. He's like, well, Brock's not coming out, what am I going to do? And Joe walks up very calmly to Heyman off the mic. He drops the microphone and says, look, I'm very disappointed. And he's talking so softly and the ringside camera has to pick it up and it's like something from The Godfather. And Joe says that I'm very disappointed and Heyman's like, I'm just a businessman. And Joe's like, I understand that, but your client has upset me and now something very bad is going to happen to you. And then Joe slaps on the Coquina clutch and Heyman passes out and it's horrifying, but it's awesome as well. The match was a letdown, Joe versus Lesnar, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. It happened at Great Balls of Fire, I think, and it lasted like, what, less than 10 minutes? And Lesnar beat Joe pretty effectively. Yeah, it was a shame. For any other wrestler, that would have just ended their momentum probably, but Joe came back firing because he's awesome on the mic and because he has this air of legitimacy. So in the build-up to SummerSlam, the four-way match, which Joe was again involved in, he comes out and tears everybody to shreds on the mic. This is the famous "look at me when I'm talking to you" promo where he just tears into Brock Lesnar without an ounce of fear about him. This is Brock Lesnar, by the way. But because Joe's character was booked to be so fearless and because Joe himself carries himself so fearlessly, it was so effective. It regained all of Joe's momentum that he possibly lost in losing to Lesnar, and it just propelled him right back up to where he was. Even look at Joe now. Like this past week, did you see him in the pre-shows to those NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver events where he's the one sitting interviewing the people who are about to go and wrestle, and you get this little sense like, he could beat the crap out of anybody that he's interviewing here. Even on commentary, Joe was awesome on commentary because he had that experience, he had that believability about him. He has that legitimate threat and it never really goes away, whether he's in the ring or not. I don't know the kind of ins and outs of the situation with Samoa Joe. I don't know about his recent injuries. I don't know whether he was ready to go and wrestle again. I don't even know if he wanted to go and wrestle again. I guess those questions will be answered in the near future by what he does next. But what I can say unequivocally is WWE should not have let him go because he's effective to them outside of the ring as well. And secondly, he's one of the greatest of all time. That's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Leave your thoughts and opinions. Share your favourite matches from Samoa Joe down below. And yeah, thanks once again. I've been Jack from Cultaholic. Do stay safe out there, of course. Do keep yourselves positive. We're getting towards the end of this now, aren't we? This horrible global situation. And I'll see you very soon.